Okay, so welcome everyone. My name is Marko, and I will talk about all the new things in React. I have a lot of slides, a lot of things to talk about. Basically, my talk will be based on React 16, all the features that we had all these years, like I think like 2 years or 3 years of React. So I will ask you like some questions so that I know what can I skip, or what are you using, what do you need to know, so that we can focus only on things that you really can benefit from, like things that you never used, or like things that you might need and you don't know. Okay, and yeah, and I will ask you about, like, it's okay, like a lot of times. So if someone's like do like this, I will really appreciate. Okay, yeah, thank you. Okay, first few things about me. I'm actively engaged in developing software for the last 7 years. I used many different languages. My focus primarily was on mobile development, native mobile development. I did mostly Android and iOS, Java and Kotlin, and Objective-C and Swift. A few years back, I switched to JavaScript, and I really liked it. And in local community, I'm like famous, a regular speaker at community events, like mostly meetups about these technologies that I work. And I also have my own agency. I'm working as independent tech consultant. Everything related with hype, so like all the new stuff. If you want to work with all the new stuff, come to me, and I will probably know or have worked with that. So my focus currently it's React and React Native, and I'm also a regular lecturer at Belgrade Institute of Technology School of Programming. So that's enough about me. All the questions you can ask here, like on Slido or slide.do or whatever. Hashtag it's and code for entrance it's Armada JS. Okay? Yeah. Okay. So I think this is like third or fourth talk today about React, and probably there will be more tomorrow. And there is a reason why it's like that, because last year and this year's year are mostly about React. So there's a really cool site called State of JS, and if you go there and you see the popular frameworks that are used, you can see something like this. So basically, React used 64% of people who submitted their opinion on that site, like a big JavaScript survey, and 64, like let's say 65% used it, and you would use it again. Okay, this small amount of people here, they actually we can switch to that one to see exactly, used it and would not use it again, like only 6%. And heard of it, would like to learn it, it's like 19%. So we have 65 and like 20, it's almost close to 20, so it's like 85% of people who submitted their opinion. They want to work and want to learn React. And this small amount of 9%, it's heard of it, not interested, because probably they are doing Angular or Vue or something else that caught their attention. So it's more interesting for them. For me, React, it's a really cool library, and it has really good ecosystem, and I'm using it. So since React team released version 16 of React, community like boosted up, like with all the new features. So they posted something like this. These are just a few things from the official documentation. So they released React 16.3, and they introduced new context API. In React 16.6, they introduced code splitting. In 16.8, they released hooks, and they wrote there that they will release concurrent mode, suspense for data fetching, and some new features in the future versions of React. We don't have like the exact dates, but it should be until the end of the year. Okay, so basically, my presentation will be about all of these things. So now I would like to know how many of you are using hooks. Okay, so then I should explain hooks. How many of you are using code splitting with suspense and lazy? Okay, that's definitely that we should explain. Okay, context. Okay, so yeah. So I have a lot of slides. I didn't know what to focus on, but now I have like better picture. So some things that let's say you're familiar with, I will go a little bit faster, and the other one I will explain in detail so that you can start using it right away. I also have examples like with real implementation, and also I have to show you code samples in live coding later if you want, if there is time. So all the questions and everything that you have, like ask on slide.com, and I will try to answer it at the end if there is time. Okay, so new context released in I think version 16.3 or 16.4. 16.3 was initially released, and after that it was improved in version 16.4 alongside with some lifecycle changes. So what context is designed for? It's designed to share data to be considered global for a lot of to be considered global for more components in a tree. So for example, if you have like Twitter, if you know Twitter web app, you have avatar in the upper right corner and you have avatar on the sidebar. So when I change avatar, I need to update these two photos. And that's like completely unrelated components if Twitter was in React. So I need some way to change that to make that change in the global state, and not just to do the props drilling. What's props drilling? Props drilling, it's when you pass the props through the multiple components to reach the final one, when it's not necessary, and some of the components doesn't have to know about that props or that data that you're passing down there. So context was really good, and when it appeared, people said, oh, okay, this will replace Redux. It will not. So it's just addition. If you have like small apps, you can use context instead of Redux, like for a global store and stuff like that, but it's not recommended. You should use it like for smaller apps, for smaller portions of state that you don't want to pass through the props, and just want to pass them like in like more elegant way. So this is good like for current authenticated user, team, or like preferred language for language switcher, so that when you change the language, you don't have to reload everything and just to reload all the JS, all the page, because it's a single page app. So you can just switch language and just exchange data which is shown. So this is basically what I already said. So let us pass data value deep into component tree without explicitly threading it through every component. And it's good for the nesting level. How it look? It's like another function method on a React object. And basically what we do first, we create context, which receives like default value. And it returns object with two values, provider and consumer. Provider is the component that we need to pass the value that we need to have in the consumer. So how does it look? So for example, we have one component that has number context and then provider object, and we have a value property where we need to pass everything that we want to have to pass through the consumer. So we wrap all that that component that needs to know about that value, and we provide. So in number item, we can use that value from the consumer if we create a consumer component and then pass the anonymous function inside, which receives first parameter as a value. So when they introduced this was really cool, and it was like really useful, and people were like, oh, this will replace Redux and stuff like that. But the syntax was not really good enough. And the syntax really improved only with hooks, because hooks give us better way to use context. Still, context is really good, and the best thing about context is that you can create multiple contexts. I don't know if you were in React State lecture in the morning, but I think Vladimir showed, or Igor, I forgot the name, showed a really cool example about multiple contexts. You can wrap another context with all the stuff that you need to pass through to the component. So this is how it looked like in version 16.4, 3 and 4. And this can be significantly improved with React hooks. I will show you an example of that later. So another thing is code splitting. Code splitting in your app can help you lazy load the things that you're currently not needed by the user. So this can dramatically improve your performance of your app. What does that mean? So in React 16.6, they provide us a way to assure that high priority updates like user input don't get blocked by rendering low priority updates. So I have example here of one app. And for example, this is like really cool app that I made. And basically what happens here? When user visits this page, you don't know if he will click on some of these cards, or he will click about, or I don't know, do something with the app. Maybe he will just go through the list and read the list. So basically, you don't have to load all your JS, because it's all in one file in single page apps. That JS needs to be loaded so that it can be shown and it can be fast. So to ensure that you don't load everything because you don't know where is user going to click, you can like code split with lazy. So you see here, when I click like on about, a new chunk of JS code with size 1.2 kilobyte was loaded. Can you see it? Should I like zoom it? Okay. And if I go back, everything works like fine. If I click here, a new chunk should be loaded. Oh, for example, I'm here on this page, and I have this switch. User who visits this page doesn't have to click this switch, because maybe he doesn't want to see the cast of the show. But if he wants to see the cast, I can enable him that, and only then load that chunk of the JavaScript, which is like really small, but it can be like much heavier. And this is really good for code splitting for if you're using some third-party libraries like D3.js or something like that, where you need to load like third library, which is like really big, and like you need to initiate it, but you don't know if user will use actually that feature or not. So you just wrap that in a way which React gave us, and it's a lazy and suspense. Suspense can suspend rendering of the components until some condition is met, and until then shows a fallback. What does that mean? So I have lazy and suspense. How does it look in code? Let's find out here. So where's first thing where we can use this? So first thing where we can use this in routes, and it looks like this. So basically, we have lazy in React library, and when we load lazy, we pass an anonymous function which uses dynamic imports of that page. And here in the component, we use suspense to wrap our routes. So basically, we don't have all the routes loaded at the same time if there are different components. So user visits page, like it has 10 different menu items that he can click on. And he wants to click only on 2. Like the rest, 8 of them are not still loaded because user never clicked on them. Okay, so just loading the chunks of the data that you actually need to display, and you can optimize your performances in that. So in suspense, you just provide a fallback which receives React component, which says, okay, until this page is loaded. So I have to reload this, and maybe to do something like this. So basically, when I click here, I see loading. This is my fallback for this component. And until the data for that component is downloaded, I see that fallback loading animation or whatever you want. So, and new chunk of file, it's loaded here. If I click here, new chunk of file, it's loaded. If I go home, again, new chunk, because we were on the details page. When we refresh, home page is not loaded because it's suspended until user clicks there. And if we go to details, okay, again, click here. So, oops, well, it's not showing. We already were there, so it's already loaded. It did not download a new part of the code. Okay, there are some constraints. React Lazy, right now, it's only supported in default exports, and React Lazy and Suspense are not available for server-side rendering. Okay, so if you're using server-side rendering, you have to use some component like loadable components or something like that. I never used one, so I don't know. New thing that was also introduced in React 16, it's React Memo. And it works similar to pure components. How many of you use pure components? Should I explain what pure components are? So, okay. So pure components are components that do not re-render every time when something changes. That are components that have implemented should component update, or what's the other one? There are two callbacks. I forgot, but it has logic that says if components should re-render or not. If you have multiple components on the page, so basically when you change one, another will probably re-render if you don't have implemented should component update method in the class components. And how would you use this memo? Yeah, and we needed that functionality. We had that functionality in React class components, which were like named stateful components or smart components. And now we have that same functionality inside inside the functional components. How we have that functionality, how we are using it. So basically, when we exporting stuff, we need to wrap it with React Memo. And this functional component now can be pure component. That means that it will not re-render every time when some other component re-renders on the page. Okay. So React Memo is to functional component what React Pure Components is to class components. The next big thing, and like the biggest, around which all the fuss this year are React hooks. So when you start learning React or working React, they tell you something like this: class components can hold state, functional components can't. Or they tell you class components can have life cycles, because they extend it from React.component class, and functional component can't do that. So hooks are changing all that stuff, and basically hooks make it possible to take a React function component and add state to it, and also allow you to hook lifecycle methods inside React functional components, like component did mount and component did update method are now available inside functional components. So why this is really useful? So basically, what's the scenario which happened earlier? You have like really nice functional component and you wanted it just to be functional forever, but you got the ticket, like use case, that you need to fix that functional component to have some part of a state, like, I don't know, it's selected or not, or something like that. So basically what you have to do, you can create a new component based on that one, or you can refactor that one. And refactoring from class components from functional components to class components, it was like a bit of pain. So they introduce hooks, and there is no need to do that anymore. So, and then you say, oh, hooks, what about classes? I don't want to use functional components. I love classes. That's okay, because hooks don't replace classes. They are just a new tool that you can use if you want to. So if the class components work for you, like most of the time, you should use them. React team said that they don't have plans to deprecate classes in React. So if you want to use them, please do. So you should treat hooks as a nice new feature, not the new best way. And there is no need to go all through your code base and like refactor all stuff to use hooks. You really don't have to do that. So I know teams who use only class components, and that's also okay. I worked with teams who are preferring like functional components, and they try to use it at maximum. That's also okay. If something works for you, you should continue using it. If it doesn't work, you should like take a look at the alternatives and maybe to find a way to implement something like that for you. So hooks have few rules. I will go through them. So only call hooks on the top level of your function, because it's not that easy to hold state in functions. So React team did a really big effort, and to ensure that every hook is called in the exact same order, you should always put like your hooks on top of your function component. Only call hooks from React function components or from custom hooks. So doesn't make sense to put them outside of components. And the name of hooks must start with use, and I will show you how to write your own hooks at the end. So keep in mind that some hooks are also, some names for the hooks are reserved by React, which are already implemented in the library. So React hooks appeared in React 16.8. It's the first release to support hooks, and current version of React is 16.9. It has some minor updates, and if you're upgrading from existing code, if you're upgrading for earlier versions of React to the newer one, and you want to use hooks, be careful. Don't forget to update all the packages, including React DOM. React DOM and React had to be the same version most of the time. I think it's always, but to be sure, like most of the time they have to be same version. So which hooks we have? Like use state, use effects, and use context are considered like basic hooks that you are probably will use most of the time. So use state hook, add states to function component. By calling use state inside the function component, we are creating single piece of state. Why is this important? Because in class components, state is always an object. It can have multiple properties which can be parts of the state. With hooks, the state doesn't have to be an object. It can be any type you want, like object, array, number, boolean, string. And that's why we say that each call of useStates create a new piece of state holding a single value. Is that okay? Okay, so there was object. It can have multiple properties. There were all parts of the state. Now we have hooks. Hooks are holding single piece of state with a single value. So useState is implemented in React object, and we use it like with object destructuring or like React useState here. And it has a bit strange syntax. It's not really strange, but because of taking advantage of all ECMAScript new features like object destructuring, array destructuring, and stuff like that, it can be strange if you're not familiar with it. But since you're working with React, I think that you should be familiar. So useState returns array with 2 elements, and we almost always use ECMAScript 6 array destructuring, which on the left side we destructure for that array like 0 element, it's that piece of state, and the element with index 1, it's a setter for that state. So basically, and on the right side it's a useState hook which returns array, and we set the initial value of that state. So, okay, there's a lot of things, so let's get there. So we have passenger tracker. So when you're entering the airplane, the stewards and stewardess are counting the passengers. So basically we have like one functional component here. It has, it needs to count the passengers, and it has useState hook. We pass the initial value for that hook, and we destructure from that passengers, like because it's array destructuring, we can name it whatever we want. We can name it passengers, and usually this is some convention. You name the first like 0 element, like the name of the state, and the first element with index 1 you name as like set something. For example, here we have passenger and set passenger. And we also have a function, increment. So we have set passengers, in which we set passengers to count, to increase by 1. So, and we are returning that passengers, and we have on click that increment function that we defined here. So basically here we have a set passenger setter for that state, and this is like integer. And here to set passenger we can increment directly, like passing passenger plus 1. But actually, because setting state it's asynchronous, we have to be careful, because when our new state depends on the previous state, it's always better that you pass a function which receives the previous state and then return the new state. Okay. Also, in class components, if you have set state, you have multiple ways to use set state. First can be object, second can be function, and it can be function and object in class components. So depending on what we want to achieve. So that was about set state. I will show you this on example later. So let me see how is the time. Okay. Use effect hook. Again, we have perfectly good function component, and then one day you need to a lifecycle method to it, for example, to fetch some data in that component, and you need to refactor everything again. With use effect like side effect, because it's giving some side effects to functions. It's called use effect. I think that's what I read somewhere. So you can handle lifecycle events inside functional components, and basically you can handle like 3 lifecycle events: component did mount, component did update, and component will unmount. And all of this you can do with one function which has also a bit strange syntax. let's take a look. So we have a functional component which is called lifecycle demo, and it has use effect hook inside. Use effect hook receives as a parameter function which returns a function. So we have a function which receives a function which returns a function. So in this first function, in that callback function, which is callback for use effect function, it's we write code that happens after every render by default. If we from that callback function return a new anonymous function, that's the unmounting lifecycle. So what the things that you want to do on component did unmount. And yeah, basically that's it. And only thing that's here happening, this is really important, that this happens with every render. The cleanup effect is that callback function returns a function. This is a bit different because cleanup function it's called after every render in function component, opposite to component did unmount in class components, which is called only when component is unmounted. So before every render here, you call this cleanup function is executed. So that's a thing that you should pay attention to. Yeah. That's written here. So I said that this is the run side effect after render every render. To prevent use effect from rendering every render, we should pass array as a second argument to use effect function. And in that array, we should pass dependencies on which will depend that component. So for example, if we have some dependency like prop here that's received in the previous component, we should pass it here as a dependency for use effect. If that prop changes, for example, match params or something, if that changes, this use effect will execute. If you leave this without any parameters, it will render only 2 times on component did mount and component did unmount. Okay. Second parameter is array. So use effect is a function that receives a function which returns a function, and second parameter as array of dependencies. It's simple. Kinda. Okay. Yeah. So this is the thing with if we leave here empty array, it will render only on component did mount and component did unmount. And if we need a component did update, we need to here to check the previous state and compare it, and then decide if we should render or re-render. Okay, use context. All the other hooks are giving us new functionality, while use context makes things nicer. So we had that number context earlier, and we wanted to use that value in some other component, and we needed to write a consumer, and inside that consumer we needed to write function. But with use context hook it's much simpler, because we can use context and take that context, and it will extract the value stored inside the context. It doesn't have to be number. Here it's number. It can be object. It can be anything you want. Okay, so we went really fast through this, and we have also custom hooks. What does custom hooks do? You can write functions which are you can write hooks that are just regular functions, but just following the third rule, which says that it needs to start with name. So basically, we can write something like this. We have here use toggle hook, which has some initial value, and it has set on, set off, use state, init, and we have toggle function which like set states opposite of the previous state. Okay. Let's see here. So details, show details page. So for example here, if I want to use this use toggle hook, I want to use it here on this toggle switch. So I have checked, which has some state if it's checked or not, and toggle cast, which is function which is invoked on changed. So basically, what I did, I wrote that custom hook use toggle, set initial state. If it's not set initial state, its default parameter false. And here I use it instead of using state and all of this using inside this component, like show details page. I wrote a custom hook which I'm using here. So I'm using toggle. First parameter, it's that if it's on and off. I'm calling it show cast because in this component it represents if it should show cast or not. It's this one. Okay. And toggle cast, it's a function. Here it's called toggle, but I can call it whatever I want because this is already structuring and I can use it whatever I want. So second thing, I have here use state hook, which is initially null. And I have show and set show. This is initial state, which will be object because I know that this service returns object. And set show is a setter for that state. So here you should be careful if you're using use effect and hooks, and if you're using async await syntax, because you cannot do this like async here because use effect expects a function which is not like a promise, because use effect has a callback which returns another function which is unmounting lifecycle. So be careful here not to use async in use effect. You will get warning. This is new. I didn't know that. Yeah, probably they added it. You should use something like this, like for a workaround, which is not like really nice, or something like this. I don't know. Depending on if your linter. So you can use ify function inside to execute that call, so that you can use async await syntax, or even better way it's to do load show like this, and then put everything here, and then call load show here. Okay. And here you can use async because we don't care about this promise here. Okay. Or we can just catch if something happens. It doesn't matter. Okay. Let me just revert this. Okay. That's basically it for use effects. Yeah. Also, I have here. So we have also one new hook, which is use ref to use references inside the functional component. It's also a really nice addition. So I want, when this component is mounted, I want to focus the input field. So I provided the ref with which I created with use ref hook, and I wanted to like add use effect when this component is mounted. I want just to focus the field. So basically, what happens here on this? I put the slow now. Okay. So basically, when it's loaded, it gets focus initially here, so I can search like home. Okay. It has initial focus, so you're providing better user experience for your users so that they can type right away. That's one thing. And here we're also using React memo not to reload too many times. And we have additional hooks. Additional hooks are we saw use ref. There is a use memo, use reducer hook, which works similar to Redux. reducer, but it can be simplified. If you have a like complex state, you can use reducer and write your custom implementation, just updating to make implementation similar to one that set state function does in class components. There's use callback, imperative handle, use layout effects, use debug value. Some of them I didn't use, so just read about them, so I don't feel comfortable talking about them. But I believe that they are all really well documented. So okay, that's basically it. And yeah, I just wanted to tell you one more thing. So here, if you have like some complicated calculation for the use state, you can use function which is executed only in the first render. So if your state, it needs to return that new state. So if you have some calculation that you need to calculate and it's like heavy on calculation, don't do it before that hook, but just pass inside the state like function and then do calculation and return what's the result of that calculation. So it will load initially after it's calculated. Okay, that's basically it. I said a lot of time basically, right? Yeah. Okay, thank you. I can answer questions now if there is time.
Thank you. That was quite a bunch of information.
Yeah.
Now we have some huge number of questions here, but
Okay.
unfortunately there's no time for all of them. So let's maybe start with the top voted one. Can you explain the difference between code chunks in Webpack and React chunks in the suspense?
Here I'm using Create React app, particularly in this application. And as I know, Create React app, it's using in the background Webpack. So I think it's basically the same thing, just implementation, which like React provides us to do. I'm not sure like completely, but I think it's the same. My opinion is the same way, because like React is using in the React scripts on this code. This code is using a React app, so it's using Create React app to bootstrap, and it's using React script. So behind the scene, it's configured Webpack who's splitting the code into chunks.
Okay, next question. Are all class lifecycles methods available via hooks?
As I know, there are like 3 of them, like component did mount, a component did update, and component will unmount. That are 3 that I know that are available through hooks, and I explained how you can use all of them. So basically, if you put like second parameter, let's see some example here. So here, if I add some parameter here, this will render only on mount and unmount. And if I want to check, like if I need component did update or something, I need to like do some check. If show something, it's different, and then should execute that hook. Okay, and I also need to pass a parameter which I want to be followed for that updates.
Okay, and the last question for the day. What do you like the most in version 16? What was the feature that you especially liked?
Yeah, I really like hooks because my code looks much cleaner. So I'm usually what I do, it's like for the pages, like the main page of the like some big page. For example, here we have this page, like shows page. I usually put this like as class component, and all the smaller parts inside are functional components. And I'm actually trying to use hooks all the time, but you need to be careful because hooks reload a lot of times if you're not using like memo, or you're not following like the right dependencies for re-render. So you need to be really careful, and you should do first thing before you start working with hooks, you should do like create your own demo, put console log everywhere to see what's executing first, and then start using hooks, because there are some strange things that you don't expect, as always with JavaScript. So you can And also with React, because React it's like a library that has a lot of things built in, so you need to be careful how you are using all of that stuff. So first of all, put console logs, take these examples from slides, put console log everywhere, and put multiple components of the page, see what's happening first, and then start using memo, start using suspense, start using lazy, and see how the changes are changing, like what's appearing, what's not in your log. Or debugger, it's the same.
Okay, thank you. As we didn't have chance to answer all the questions, I invite you to approach the speaker later on and ask your question or some other question. And please give another warm applause for our speaker.
Thank you.